Okay, so 5.3, this is probably one of the more difficult sections, so I'm going to go slow on this. We're dividing polynomials. So the first part's pretty easy. We're talking about dividing by 2x. And if you look at their example here, we kind of did some of this in the previous lesson where we said, we looked at this and said, okay, we could split this up and say 4x squared over 2x, which is what they did right here. Then they took their middle term, negative 2x over 2x, and then 8 over 2x. So they kind of split this thing up. And then they looked to see if anything would cancel out. Well, 4 divided by 2 gave them 2. X squared over x, well, this x to the first power made one of these x's, x squareds, go away. So we ended up with just an x. 2x divided by 2x is just 1. And then 8 divided by 2 gave them the 4. And this x on the bottom didn't cancel out. So that's kind of how they came up with that. So let's look at one that, a similar problem. So they're saying take 15y to the third minus 25y squared plus 5 and divide it by 5y. So you can see on the bottom they put their 5y's here. So we need to put the term on the top that goes with it. So 15y to the third, we're just splitting this up. They put the minus sign right here for this minus. Then 25y squared. And then we've got our plus 5. So you just kind of split it up. The denominator is still 5y though. That didn't change. So down here, they've taken and said 15 divided by 5 to get their 3. Well, this is a y to the first power. So it would take away, it would cancel out one of these y to the thirds, and we would end up with y squared. They put their negative. 25 divided by 5 is 5. And this y right here took away one of these y squareds, so they just got y. And then on the last term, they did 5 divided by 5 and got 1, and there was nothing to cancel out with this y on the bottom, so it had to stay there. Okay. Okay. So let's work one of these on our own. So if we're dividing this by 4x squared, they're wanting us to take each one of these things and put 4x squared underneath it. So all I'm doing is writing what the original problem is, but I'm dividing by 4x squared under each one of these. Okay, then I want to take this one section at a time, and I always deal with the numbers first. 8 divided by 4, that's 2. Then do I have any of the x's that will cancel out? Yes, 2 of these x's on the bottom will take away 2 of these x's on the top. So if I have x to the third and I take away 2 of them, I just have x to the first. And usually they don't put the 1 there, right? But 2 of those x's took away 2 of those. These 2 are the exact same term. So 4x squared minus 4x squared, all of that cancels out. That would just be a 1. Right? 4 divided by 4 is 1. X squared over x squared, those cancel out. So that just turns into 1. 20 divided by 4, that's 5. This time, I have more x's on the bottom than I have on the top. So that means that one of these x's, this is x to the first, so this will take away one of these, but I'll still have one there, right? So I still have an x on the bottom, even if one of these cancels out with one of those. Okay, on our last term, we've got 40 divided by 4, which is 10, and I have nothing to cancel out with this x squared that's on the bottom. So it just stays x squared on the bottom because there was nothing to cancel out. Okay. Okay, so this one, they're telling me to divide everything by 4x. So I'm going to split it up. Negative 48x to the fourth plus 16x squared minus 8. we're dividing everything by 4x. Okay, so negative 48 divided by 4, that's negative 12. You can kind of think of it this way. If there's more x's on the top than there is on the bottom, because this is just an x to the first, the top's going to win. So this one x takes away one of these x to the fourth, so I will end up with x to the third, and I won't have anything on the bottom because it canceled out. 16 divided by 4 is 4. Once again, the top's going to win because I've got x squared and I just have x to the first. So one of these x's on the bottom takes away one of them on the top, but I still have x to the first on the top when I do that. And on my last term, negative 8 divided by 4, well, that's negative 2, but I still have this x on the bottom because there was nothing to cancel out on the top. Okay. So now we're going to turn it up quite a bit. This first page really explains what you're supposed to do. I am probably going to go ahead and work an example. This one is kind of a guided example of what you're doing, so I'm going to skip to this. So I'm going to try to go slow on this part. They're saying they want us to divide x squared plus 8x plus 3 by x plus 2. So there is an easier way to do this, and it's called synthetic division, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. I'm going to show you how to do that today. The problem with synthetic division is it works for things that say like x plus 2, x plus 5. When I get down here and want to divide by y squared plus 1, it's not going to work anymore. It doesn't work for n squared minus 2 either. So there's some times when you're going to have to know how to do this long division versus the synthetic. So here's what we started with. I know that I'm trying, so they put their x squared plus 8x plus 3 underneath the box. They put the x plus 2 on the outside. So the very first question they ask themselves is, what am I going to have to multiply this x by right here to get an x squared? Well, the answer is x, because x times x gives you x squared. That's why they put an x up here. So x times x gets you x squared. But then you also have to multiply this x by 2, and x times 2 gets you 2x. Okay, so they decided to put an x here so that they could get this x squared to go away. And they wanted x times x to get them x squared, because your goal is to subtract and get rid of these things. So x squared minus x squared gets you nothing. That cancels out. And then you do 8x minus 2x. So 8x take away 2x. That's going to get you 6x. And where did they come up with this 3? They brought it down. Okay, so now they've got to decide. We're moving to the next step. Now we've got to decide, well, what do I have to multiply this x by right here? That's always the term that you're thinking about. What do I have to multiply x by to get rid of this 6x right here? I need that to cancel out. I need to be able to subtract that by something. So it would have to be a 6 so that you could get 6x. 6 times x gave you 6x. 6 times 2 gives you 12. And then when you subtract those, that 6x cancels out. You get 3 minus 12, which is negative 9. This is your remainder because there's no other, we brought down the 3 already. There's no other number to bring down. So our answer, if you look at the top of this, our answer is x plus 6 with a remainder of negative 9. You can also write it x plus 6 plus negative 9 over x plus 2. the place they got the x plus 2 is what they divided by in the front, okay? So let's work one of these by ourselves. So we've got x plus 5, put that on the outside. Underneath, we should put x squared plus 4x plus 1. Okay, so we're asking ourselves, what do we have to multiply? It's always the first, it's always this. What do you multiply x by to get x squared? Because when we subtract it, we need it to go away. Well, I'm going to have to multiply it by x to get it to go away. So x, then you take your x and multiply it by both of these terms over here. So x times x gets me x squared. X times 5 gets me a positive 5x. But I have to subtract this whole thing. So x squared minus x squared, well, that's nothing. If you don't get nothing, you did something wrong. Because that's the whole goal, is to get this first thing to go away. Then you're going to do 4x minus 5x. Well, 4 take away 5 is negative 1x. 4x minus 5x is negative 1x. And you can go ahead and bring down your plus 1 here. Okay, we're almost done. We need to think about what can we multiply x by to get negative 1x. We want to get rid of this first term always. Well, it has to be a minus 1 because negative 1 times x is going to get you negative 1x. It needs to end up being the exact same thing. So negative 1 times 5 gets you negative 5. Then we want to subtract these things. Negative 1 minus a negative 1x. Remember, minus minus is plus. So this is really negative 1x plus 1x, which is nothing, which is what we needed. We needed it to go away. Then we move to our other term over here, 1 minus negative 5. And 1 minus negative 5 is really 1 plus 5, 6. So we have two ways that we can write. There's nothing else to bring down, so we know we're done. So we have two ways that we can write our answer. First way is just to say it's x minus 1 with a remainder of 6. The second way is x minus 1 plus your remainder of 6 over whatever you were dividing by. You write that as a fraction. Okay, two different ways of writing the same thing. This is our remainder. Questions? We're going to do a few more.
So when it's like the first part of the thing, why do you wait to do the 4x plus 1 and you only worry about is that like you just worry about the first number? That's
yes, like your goal is to get one thing to cancel out at a time. So you're trying to get rid of the very first term, this x squared.
Okay, so you're just like each part, you're only worrying about one part at a time. Okay.
Yeah. So let's go down here and look at this one. This is they kind of jump started this one a little bit, but so they've written out the problem for us. We've got n squared minus 2. So they're trying to get rid of the n to the third. So they thought, well, what can we multiply? So ignore the plus 2 right now. But what could we multiply n by that's going to get us, I'm sorry, this is an n squared. What can you multiply n squared by that's going to get you n to the third so that it'll cancel out? Well, n times n squared is n to the third. But they also had to multiply this n by the negative 2. And n times negative 2 is negative 2n. So you wouldn't put the negative 2n underneath the 2n squared because they don't go together. They're not like terms. That's why they scooted over and put it under something that actually works. So then they subtracted and said, okay, n to the third minus n to the third, nothing. We can bring down 2n squared minus nothing, still 2n squared. 0n minus a negative 2n. Well, minus a minus is a plus, so this turns into positive 2n. And then they've just brought down their negative 6. So that's how they came up with this first n. Now we're trying to get rid of 2n squared. You always focus on whatever you have in the front. So they said, well, what can I multiply n squared by that's going to get me a 2n squared so that when I subtract them, they cancel out? Well, it's 2. 2 times 2n squared gets you 2n squared. So now I can subtract them and they'll go away. Your goal is always to get whatever you have in the front. We'll also have to multiply the 2 by the negative 2, which is going to give me negative 4. I wouldn't put it under this term because negative 4 doesn't have any n's. So you scoot over and put it with the term that it goes with. And then when we subtract, these go away. 2n minus nothing is still 2n. Negative 6 minus negative 4. So negative 6 minus minus is really a plus. So negative 6 plus 4 is going to get me negative 2. And I think they've already got the negative there for us, so I don't need to put in the extra negative. Okay, so negative 6 minus negative 4 is negative 2, and they've got the minus right there for us. Okay, so there's nothing else to bring down. If there's nothing else to bring down, all of this is my remainder. So they wrote the answer n plus 2 plus 2n minus 2, which was our remainder. And you always put it over what you're dividing by. So down here would be n squared minus 2. Okay, we've got y squared plus 1, and we want to know how many times. I'm going to give myself a little bit more room. So y squared plus 1. We want to know how many times that will go into 3y squared minus 4 plus y to the third. The first thing that I'm noticing is this is going to cause me problems because this is not written in order. Like usually you would have the highest power exponent and then, so y to the third should be at the front. So I'm going to back up and say, oh, I'm going to rewrite this because that's going to give me problems. So I'm going to put the y to the third at the front. Then it would be plus 3y squared, and then it would be minus 4. I would write in order because if you don't, you're going to get confused. Okay, another thing you might want to consider doing is that there's one thing that's missing here. Like it goes y to the third, y squared, and then y to the first. Like we don't have any y to the first. So it probably would help to put for the y to the first, so y to the third plus 3y squared. Since I don't have any y to the first, it's probably going to help you out to put a 0 y to the first minus 4. Kind of keeps your place values in order so you don't get messed up. Okay, so the whole goal is to focus on this very first term here. We want to get rid of it. And it's always whatever comes in front here that you're going to multiply by. So I need y squared to turn into y to the third. I need y squared to turn into y to the third. So I'm going to multiply by y to the first, right? Because y to the first times y squared will get me y to the third. But then I need to multiply by the 1 too. So y to the first times 1 would be 1 y to the first. Well, since it's 1 y to the first, I don't want to stick it under y to the second. I need to stick it right here under 1y because it's 1 y to the first. I'm going to scoot over. So that's why you want to put that 0 term in there to hold that spot. So then we want to subtract this whole thing. So y to the third minus y to the third, nothing. 3y squared minus nothing, well, I have 3y squared. 0y minus 1y, well, that's going to be minus 1y. 0 minus 1 is going to give you minus 1. Okay, we need to get rid of this 3y squared. So I need to think, well, what can I multiply y squared by that's going to get me 3y squared? Because it's always got to be the exact same thing because you're subtracting. So I think we need to multiply by positive 3 so that 3 times y squared is 3y squared. 3 times 1 would give me 3, but I don't want to put the 3 right here, and I forgot to bring down my negative 4. Sorry about that. So I multiplied 3 times y squared, and I got 3y squared. Now I'm doing 3 times 1. Well, that's just 3. I wouldn't put it under something that has a y. I need to put it over here with the constant term that matches it. That's the like term. Then we subtract the whole thing. So we go 3y squared minus 3y squared. That's nothing, which is good. That's what I need to have. Negative 1y minus nothing. That's still negative 1y. Okay, negative 4 minus 3, negative 7. No other numbers to bring down. Then if there's no other numbers to bring down, you're done. You write the answer. So our answer, remember, we could write it two ways. We could say that it is y plus 3. We don't really need that to the first, but y plus 3 with a remainder of negative y minus 7, because we don't need the 1. The other way to write that is y plus 3 plus, you put your remainder as a fraction, all of that stuff over what you had to begin with, what you're dividing by, y squared minus 1, which is what we divided by. Okay. Synthetic division is a piece of cake. So this is going to go a lot faster. I will go slow, like explaining the process, but you can't use synthetic division on all the problems. It's just the ones that have just the regular, when you're dividing by x to the first, or x to, this one's an x to the first. So these up here that have these crazy n squareds minus 2 or y squared plus 1, you don't want to do the synthetic division. So here's how they came up with this. The first thing they did was they focused on what we're dividing by, and they put their number on the outside. So look how your plus 1 turned into a minus 1. So they did the opposite. So if it's a positive 1, you're going to put a minus 1 here. Then they made sure everything was in order. So x to the third, x squared, x to the first, and then no x's. They put their coefficients right here. So there was 1x to the third, so they put a 1. 4x squared, they put a 4. 1x, that's where the 1 came from. Negative 4, that's where the negative 4 came from. Okay, so the first step after you do that is to bring this 1 straight down. So you brought the 1 straight down. The next thing that you want to do is take this 1 and you multiply it by whatever's in front here. So 1 times negative 1, well, that gets you the negative 1 that they've got right here. Okay, then you add these two numbers. 4 plus negative 1 is 3. Okay, I think that they brought the problem down right here. Then you take the 3 that you got and you multiply it just like you did before by negative 1. 3 times negative 1 is negative 3. And they wrote that in our next blank. So then they added these two things. 1 and negative 3 is negative 2. So now they're saying we'll take your negative 2 and multiply it by this negative 1. And negative 2 times negative 1 is positive 2. And then you add these, negative 4 and 2 is negative 2. This last term is your remainder. So this is the answer. this row right here. So if you'll look, we started with something that was x to the third, and when they wrote their answer, it's one less than that, so it's x squared. The 1 goes in the front. So we don't usually write it if it's in the front, but this 1 right here means, let me write this. This 1 means 1, x squared, plus this 3. So we're going to move down, so 3x to the first, then minus 2. Well, if I'm at x to the first, I wouldn't have any x's, because there would be, because we go x second, x to the first, no x's, right? And this last term, this number is our remainder, which is negative 2, which is exactly what they have right here, except for they've got it written the other way. So here's our remainder, and we need to stick it over whatever we were dividing by. And if you look back at the very first of the problem, we're dividing by x plus 1. That's what needs to go here. Not minus, plus, sorry. Plus 1. Okay, now let's go slow on. Let's look at one more. Or actually, we're looking at 2 more. First step, pick out what you're dividing by. You're dividing by x plus 2. So this thing over in this box is always going to be the opposite of whatever this is. So if it's x plus 2, you're going to put minus 2 here. The reason that this works is just like what we were doing up before when we were doing the division. Remember, we were having to subtract everything. Well, when we change it to a negative, it takes care of that subtraction that we were having to do before. Okay, the next thing you need to do is you need to make sure that these are in order. So if I x to the third, then I've got an x squared, then I would need an x to the first, and then our regular term. So that's in order. You list the coefficients. It's 1x to the third, so 1. Negative 6, x squared. Positive 2x. Negative 5. You list the number, you leave the x's out of this. Okay. You okay with where we got all that stuff? You bring the first number straight down. You put 1 here. Then you say, well, 1 times whatever is in the front, and 1 times negative 2 is negative 2, and it goes right here. You add these two numbers together. So negative 6 plus negative 2 gets us negative 8. Then you take your negative 8 and do the exact same thing. You multiply negative 8 times negative 2, you get 16. Then you add these two numbers. 2 and 16 is 18. Then you take your 18 and you multiply it by negative 2. And 18 times negative 2 is negative 36. Then you add these two numbers, negative 5 and negative 36 is negative 41. Okay, these first three numbers are your answer, and the last one is going to be your remainder. So that means I need a 1 and a negative 8 and a 18 in my answer, and I need my, and I'm going to, so my remainder's minus 41. So 41 over, remember the thing you put it over is the x plus 2, whatever you were dividing by in the beginning. That's where that came from. Now, how do we decide what power of x's go behind these? If we started with an x to the third, we're going to move down 1, and this is not going to be an x to the third, it's going to be x squared. Then the next one would be x to the first. Since this is a positive 18, we're going to stick a plus there. But that's it. Okay. look at another one. So they've taken they're wanting to divide this by this. So the first thing they did was they took their -3 and put it down here and made it be +3. The next thing they did was they looked at that and they were like, oh, that is not in order, right? This has got the x to the third at the end. And so we need it to be in order. So we need to write 4x to the third. The next term would be x squared. Well, there's not any x squared. So they put, well, that's going to have to be a 0x squared then. We do have plus 9x, and then our -5 would come in at the end, right? So they put the numbers in order. If there wasn't something there, they put a 0 there. Like the x squared was missing, so they had to put 0x squared. Well, this is where the 4 and the 0 and the 9 and the -5 came from. Okay, then, you good with that part? Okay, then you bring your 4 down. Your first number you bring down, and then you take 4 times whatever's in the front. So 4 times 3, it got us 12. We add 0 and 12, we get 12 right here. Take the 12, multiply it by 3, get 36. You add the 9 and the 36, and you get 45. 45 times 3, is that 135, I think? So they took right there 45 and they multiplied it by 3. They got 135. When you add those two numbers together, you get the 130, which is your remainder. X minus 3 came from the very beginning of the problem. That's what we were dividing by. We started out with an x to the third. That's why we've got 4x squared here. This would be 12x because we're going to go down. X squared, x to the first, plus 45. Wouldn't have any x's after it. Okay. Last problem.
So what would be 4x? What would be 4x to the third? Like, where did it get?
Okay, so this is kind of like a trick or a shortcut. And if you look back up at these problems that we worked the long way, when we divided by, we're dividing by x, we're dividing an x squared by x, look, the answer automatically went from x squared down to x. Okay, same thing like this n to the third, when we actually did it longhand, when we're dividing n squared by n to the third, it went down to an n because we took 2 n's out of, okay, let's see if there's another one. This one's like what we're doing right now, I guess. We've got, all of ours are x to the third.
So just when you're doing it that way, you need to see what your
highest power is. It's going to be the highest power and 1 less than that. Because this x, right, this x took away one of these x to the thirds. It divided out. So that's why it goes down 1. So if we're starting out with x minus 2, we know it's got to be the opposite of -2. So we're going to put +2. That, or +2. That takes care of the subtraction. Okay, this is not in order. So it has to be in order. So I've got a 5x to the third would be my highest power. I have a +2x squared. I don't see any just x to the first. So I have to put +0x to the first because there's not any there. You can't skip that place just because it's not there. You have to have it. So, and then I've got -1. So my coefficients here are going to be 5, 2, 0, -1. Going to bring down the 5, and then we're going to say 5 times 2, 10. Going to add those two together. It's going to get me 12. Going to have to do 12 times 2, which is 24. Going to add these, 0 and 24, 24. 24 times 2, 48. Negative 1 and 48 is 47. The last number is your remainder, 47 over whatever you had to start out with, which is x minus 2. That's your remainder. The rest of the terms, the 5, the 12, and the 24, you're going to have one less than what you started out with. And we started out with an x to the third, so this needs to be 5x squared plus 12x plus 24. And since it was a positive 47 plus 47. And that is it. On 5.3.